Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm Nelson Casper, government professor emeritus, long time, and friend of Paul Theroux. I want to thank the Dialogue Project and especially the co-director, Christy Clemens, for all the help she's given in sponsoring this talk. And I want to give Paul, this is a very special event for me. And the reason is that Paul did me an enormous service when I was in Kampala, when we met about 150 years ago. Because Paul was the director of the Adult Studies Center and extramural tutor, which meant that he connected with people in Uganda who were not at Makerere but enrolled there to give lectures over the radio. This is a precursor to Zoom. We wouldn't think of doing it now. So Paul asked me, would you give a set of lectures on the politics of Uganda? And I had just come out to do my research, and I was teaching in the department there. So I said, sure. So I gave the lectures, and then Paul says, I think we could get these published. And he arranged to do it, and it became my first book. And I thought that was wonderful. Now, I need to say that my output is nothing compared to Paul's. Paul has published dozens of books, and it raises two kinds of questions. The first question is, how many has he produced? Now, there are various numbers that have been put forward. I should say, and the second question is the division among his readers for his books. On the first one, Paul himself said 56 books. Roundabout, there we go. That's exactly right. Others vary. We know that there are at least 30 novels and 12 travel books. 13th one on Canada is going to come out next year. And in addition to that, there are travel collections. There are 2 books on Servidya Naipaul, and a bunch of other things. And then there are the movies that have come out of his books. So he's been extraordinarily productive, regardless of exactly how many books he's actually published. On the second question, it's really interesting. The people I meet can be divided into 2 categories. Now, there may be some exceptions. I think actually I'm one, but people read his travel books and not the novels, or they read the novels and not the travel books. And it's puzzling, and it's a shame because there are ways in which they are united. And Paul himself has explained what he's trying to do in the books he writes. The common theme that ties them together, and this is Paul's words, not mine, is that each one shows a person out of his element trying to solve a problem and trying to survive while doing it. And that applies as much to travel as it does to the novels. A solitary person overcoming hostile circumstances. Again, those are Paul's words. Now, in one case, the person who's trying to survive, to overcome problems, is the protagonist in the novel. Paul invents that protagonist. In the other case, the travel books, it's Paul. Paul is the one who's solitary, trying to overcome hostile circumstances, and I think he'll tell you something about that. Putting them together, Paul suggests his books focus on how you become the person you are meant to be. And we are much richer thanks to the person Paul has become. So that makes it completely appropriate to tell you the title for his talk today is Crossing Borders, and I turn it over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Nelson. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Nelson is an old friend. Just to correct you, though, it was 58 years ago that we first met. 58 wonderful years ago when we were both much younger and living in Uganda. You were newly arrived. I think I got there before you. And I was the acting director of the Adult Studies Center. I was 25 years old. Adult Studies Center, my students were mainly older than me, and older than you too, I think. And I haven't seen Nelson since then. You left, I left, we went on our travels, and here we are again. I'm very, very grateful to be invited by you, by Dartmouth. I've never been here before. It's an amazing place. You all know that. It's special. And, you know, you produced Meryl Streep, A.J. Liebling, Michael Corleone. You know that he went, theoretically, Michael Corleone went to Dartmouth. Did you know that? Yeah, okay, you know that. Good. So, Dr. Seuss, too. The title was suggested to me, Crossing Borders. Is it the theme of this seminar, or is it the theme of the department?
It's a special topic in the dialogue project.
It's a special topic in the dialogue project, Crossing Borders. So when it was suggested to me, I thought, I'm the man. I'm the man. I know I can do this. If it was another topic, I might have some difficulty. It's my favorite subject, crossing a border, a physical border, an intellectual border, cultural border, metaphysical border. I think the first border that I actually crossed in my life was the threshold of my own house, leaving home, going away, and then other borders have suggested themselves since then. So it's in general, crossing a border is about, we think of a border as an important thing. It involves risk, but also when you think about a border, borders that you've crossed, you are people of experience. Some of you my own age. You've lived a long time. You've crossed borders. You know that there's a risk involved. And usually the intention of crossing a border is transformation. You want to find out something. You want to be transformed. You want to learn something. You want to change. Why else? I mean, if you don't want to stay home. And so the people who cross borders are people of ambition, imagination, and ideally willing to take a risk. I must say one of the biggest borders or transformations is learning a language. So when you're learning a language, you are crossing a border into another culture, into another realm, and knowing a new language opens up an entirely new world to you. And that's a transformative act. I think Kipling once said something like, we remember where we lost our virginity in the same way that we lost that thought never escapes you. You always remember where you lost your virginity. Your virginity. You think of it in a symbolic way. I think you remember the first country you went to, the first language you learned. All of that, because imprinted, is on your mind. And I've traveled in the course of my life. I think first, so at the threshold of your life. I think when I decided to become a writer, I was trained academically in pre-med. I was a pre-med student intending to be a doctor. But I came of age in a turbulent time, some of you might remember it, the early 60s. I graduated in 1963. You remember the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement was very big, the assassination of Kennedy. Cities were burning. People think the period that we're in now is not great. It doesn't inspire you with saying, waving the flag or whatever it is. We're living in a very difficult time, but it's nothing compared to what we've been through. So we know we've overcome horrible things. The Civil War was probably the worst period in American history, but the 60s was a very trying time, and my solution for it was, after I was an anti-war protester, I was arrested in Amherst. It was a disgrace for my family, but it was, I took it as a badge of honor, actually. And then I decided to join the Peace Corps, and my life changed when I joined the Peace Corps. Are any of you former Peace Corps volunteers? Any here? One. Where were you?
Nepal.
In Nepal. So you were a really early guy, maybe.
Yes.
Because that was Nepal was the first. That was the first. Nigeria, Nepal, and India were the first. What year were you there?
67 to 71.
Okay, but they were there in '62. You know.
Oh yes, they were early.
In fact, I knew the ambassador there was a man called Stebbins, and who was in Uganda. Okay, so have you been back to Nepal?
I go almost every year.
There you go. And I was in Nyasaland, which became Malawi. It's in my heart. I learned the language. I'm sure you learned the language, and it gave me a compass. First it was a British territory when I first went there. Talk about a border crossing. Going to Central Africa when it was this Union Jack was flying over the government offices. They were all British civil servants there. It was a colony. It was a British territory, actually. And it was a big moment for me because I was able to see what British colonialism was like. I had a look at that. And then 7 months later, it became the independent Republic of Malawi, and I saw what African independence was all about. One flag came down, another flag went up. People were very hopeful. A lot of USAID, which has just been defunded, built numerous schools in Malawi. And it was transformative for the country. So USAID, which is now no longer exists, I believe, at least in the form that it did, was transformed Malawi society, and it became a much more literate, outward-looking place because of that, just because of this agency, which they took all the money away from. And so I was in a school there, and I think that was the first. So that was the first border crossing, very, very important. Also, I had a perspective on the States, and I remember being there. When you in the States, I had no notion of where we were going. I just felt kind of turbulence. Vietnam, civil rights, all of them exercised my mind. But then I was in Africa, I could see, I had a perspective on what might happen. And Nelson might agree with me that when we were in Africa, we saw the political process in a simplified form. We saw how people canvassed for votes. We saw some people getting elected or being corrupt or whatever it is. But it was kind of a small scale. And I was able to observe just how the political process worked. It was a very big deal for me because I was very confused by the whole. I grew up outside Boston, and Boston politics was another story. But I was always very confused by who ran, how they got votes, whatever it was, and campaigning. And that was a big thing. So I was able to understand the political process by living in a country that had just become independent and political and voting. So that was a border crossing that really mattered to me. Subsequently, I've crossed many borders. Pakistan into India. Big deal, actually, because the countries are not friendly. So I would say also the border crossings that I'm talking about are land borders. It's not about flying from Berlin to Moscow or Delhi to Bangkok. It's walking across the border. Walking, or a bus comes, you get out of the bus, you walk across the border. That's the thing that impressed you? Because you're on one side. I'll use the example of Ethiopia. So to progress from Ethiopia into Kenya, you have to take a bus from Addis Ababa to a place called Moyale. Moyale is nothing. Most borders in Africa, there's nothing. It's a no man's land. But on one side, they speak Amharic, and the other half, they speak Swahili. So that's a big deal. And in the middle, there's no talking. But there's usually people lurking. So in any border, and the Mexican-US border is another example, has its own culture. At the kind of no man's land culture, the culture of the frontier, let's say. So you arrive at technically the border of Ethiopia, and you walk across into Kenya. And you're walking across, in this case, from woods, forests, into a desert, because the northern part of Kenya is a desert, and you end up Samburu. Is where Nelson is familiar with Samburu. So you end up in Samburu, but between there and Samburu is very dangerous and very strange. For example, when you're in Ethiopia, you're among people who Amharic-speaking Coptic Christians, mainly. When you go across, you're in basically a war zone. So you walk across, suddenly it's all different. It's like a different planet. And you're there. Has anyone been there? Anyone crossed from Ethiopia into, okay, no, right. So this is news to you. That when you're there, there are the Shifta people who come from the Ogaden Desert. And the Shifta are always armed with an AK. They usually have a camel, and they're looking for trouble. They're hungry. And so you get on a truck, cattle truck, ideally, because if it's a truck with a lot of people in it, they drive like mad and dangerously. If it's got cattle in it, they want to preserve the cattle. They don't care about the people, but if it's cattle, they don't want to kill the cattle. So you're there holding on to it, and you're thinking, maybe I'm too old for this. I did this in 2001. And when driving across, as I say, it's very safe in Ethiopia. The people are hungry, but it's safe. But when you get into the Samburu Desert, there are these Shifta who are Somalis wandering around. And the truck that I was in, I was, bouncing around, I was on top, holding the cattle down there. And suddenly, bang, bang. It's a guy shooting at the truck. So the man next to me said, Fanya nini bwana, what's up? I said, Fanya nini. I said, hapana taka kufa. I don't want to die. And he then said in English, he doesn't want your life, bwana. He wants your shoes. Hungry people, not murderous. He's just hungry. Anyway, they shot the truck. The truck kept going because there's cattle in it. And we got to, what is it, the capital there, the main town? Maralel, yeah, Maralel. So we get to Maralel, and then I kept going. Then I'm in Kenya. People are speaking Swahili. Another place. The next border is Kenya to Uganda, another border. Then Uganda across Lake Victoria to Tanzania. Then Tanzania into Malawi. Then Malawi into Mozambique. So this is a book actually I'm describing. It's called Dark Star Safari. So I started off in Cairo, and I ended up in Cape Town. Think of the borders. All interesting, all walking. So walk or sailing in the case of Lake Victoria. And it's really interesting. And you realize I'm in a different place. And each place with its own problem, its own issues, its own language. And I felt then I was growing. I was seeing things growing, writing. And I had a book. I want to say that in literature, you've all read, maybe, David Copperfield. Have you really read David Copperfield? It's My copy is 877 pages. Has anyone read the 877-page David Copperfield? But you know what David Copperfield, Mr. Murdstone, and his wife Clara. So David has a very tough upbringing. Actually, the book was written by Dickens when Dickens wanted to write an autobiography. He thought, I'm going to write an autobiography, and he had written a number of books. He was an excitable little guy and a genius. They don't read his books. I don't know whether the English department here doesn't, but all white guys, particularly English, aren't popular in a lot of curriculum these days. You know, there you go. But Dickens is the Shakespeare of the novel. It's a slog, the whole book. And Dickens wrote it instead of an autobiography. When he started writing an autobiography, then he thought, you know, his father was in jail, a debtor's prison, Dickens. And how humiliating it is for Dickens to think of his father in a debtor's prison. Just terrible. Talk about crossing borders, just in. So he suffered there. And then Dickens worked in a shop, the blacking factory, where he put labels on bottles. He was humiliated by this, just having to sit in a shop and put labels on bottles. It was a horrible experience, and Dickens' horrible experience he's turned into his fiction. So, if David Copperfield's too long for you, then I suggest Great Expectations. Much shorter, very good. Even shorter, Hard Times. But what I want to say is that David Copperfield is a writer. But for 800 pages of the book, he doesn't do any writing. He's just a guy, young, his father's died, his mother's a widow, his mother marries a horrible man, Mr. Murdstone. Then his mother dies. Then Mr. Murdstone beats him. The scene where Murdstone is whipping him is just very upsetting. It's a very upsetting book, actually, because he has such a tough time. And you think, this is Dickens becoming a writer. But David is just, he works for Murdstone's wine store. Murdstone is a very tough, horrible man. And then he has a love affair, and then it doesn't work out. Ultimately, page 813, things change. Why? David goes to Switzerland. Until that point, he's in London or he's in Suffolk, Norfolk, but doesn't leave England. Suddenly he leaves England, and he says, I went away from England, not knowing even then how great the shock I was that I had to bear. I left all who were dear to me and went away and believed that I had borne it, and it was past. As a man upon a field of battle will receive a mortal hurt and scarcely know that he is struck, so I, when I was left alone with my undisciplined heart, I had no conception of the wound with which I had to strive. The knowledge came upon me not quickly, but little by little and grain by grain. And then, in Switzerland, he writes something. The first time he writes something. So for 800 pages, he's experiencing being beaten, being bereaved, losing his parents, losing in love, having a terrible time. Suddenly he's in Switzerland. It's very interesting to me, in terms of crossing borders, that Dickens conceived someone deciding to become a writer and writing something only when he left, when he was far away from home in Switzerland. And so in that chapter, which is chapter 58, he writes something, sends it home, and it gets published. Then he becomes a real writer. Interesting, huh? It happened to me. So I was going to be a doctor. I went to Nyasaland. It became Malawi. I stayed there. I kept writing, and I thought, I'm really not suited to be a doctor. I love writing. I'm going to become a writer. So, and the other thing is, you leave home, and a miracle happens. You have something to write about. When you're home, what are you going to write about? Your unhappy family or whatever it is, something. Your neighborhood, not very interesting. You go to Africa or wherever, Nepal. I'm sure that Nepal, you went there and you thought, my goodness, I've never been anywhere like this before. This is a kind of miracle. Didn't you feel that? An awakening? So, and particularly Nepal, because Kathmandu was the destination for free spirits. And so I felt that too. And I thought it was a very, very big deal for me. Later, in terms of other books, I wrote this book, On the Plain of Snake. This is, okay, maybe you've read it, maybe not. You can buy it somewhere if you want. But in terms, I'm talking about physical border crossings now. So I was I stayed friendly with all the people I was in the Peace Corps with. And year after year, we met once a year and had a weekend usually, drinking beer, playing games, talking about old times. And one of them, usually they came to my house in Cape Cod, but one time we were in Arizona and I had never been to Nogales. Have any of you been to Nogales, Arizona? You have, right? Okay, so you know what it is. And so this friend of mine said, let's go to Nogales. So we went to Nogales. And I had the experience of a lifetime there. I had crossed a lot of borders, as I said, to India. When I wrote the Great Railway Bazaar, I went from Pakistan into India. I went from China into Russia, from Mongolia into China, crossed the border from Mexico to Guatemala, Guatemala, and lots of time. England into Scotland, there's an experience. But I had never seen a fence on a border. The fence was made from landing pieces of metal that had been used in the Iraq War. And it was repurposed to build a wall. This was in probably 2013, maybe, something like that. And I had never seen a wall. It was a dense wall, so it was high. You couldn't see over. It was about 30 feet high, maybe 40, of just metal. And for as far as you could see, it was down. It was a real wall, a metal wall, miles that way and miles that way. And then in Nogales, there was a door in the wall and a turnstile. They've changed it since you went there, it might be different. But this was something I had never seen before. Normally, a border, you walk across a border, there's a fence, chicken wire fence, or there's a gateway, and there's a little immigration office, and then they say, go over there, and then you walk, I don't know, 300 yards, and there's another. But this was a door from Nogales, Arizona, to Nogales, Mexico. It was the most amazing thing. It's a bit like, Alice in Wonderland, where you open, suddenly you go through the door. So I had my passport, and I was with my friends, and I saw it, and we went through the turnstile, showed there was a little booth, showed it, they said, okay, go. I went through it. Suddenly, I went from the dusty streets of Nogales, Arizona, to the jolly mariachi bands and food stalls in Nogales, Mexico, where there was restaurants, dentists, people going to dentists, medical care, hotels, and life. The place was full of life. It was also full of people who had been kicked out of the States or were trying to come back into the States. But it was two entirely different cultures. Once upon a time, there was no wall, and this people walked back and forth. In fact, the Nogales fire department used to put out fires in Nogales, Arizona. They went back and forth if there was a problem. In the same way that you went during 9/11, Canadian firefighters went to New York. They went big just to help out with 9/11. So that happened all along the Mexican border. It was quite different from what it is now. But it was friendly. People went across to work, they went back and forth. They still go back and forth, they work and so forth. But I had never seen a doorway to a different country. So I walked across. So that was a very formative thing. I marked I was going to mention this pitiless wall was monumental, a multi-million-dollar symbol in steel that depicts our national obsession with threat and contagion. In a lifetime of crossing borders, I found this fence the oddest frontier I had ever seen, more formal than the Berlin Wall, more brutal than the Great Wall of China, yet in its way, as much an example of the same folie de grandeur. So I went, and then I thought, I'm in a different country, and I must keep observing. And so I went back. That was really very formative. And then when the frontier became news about, because the Mexican border is very dangerous, and as I say, there's a culture there. The culture it's a cartel culture, but also it's a frontier culture. They have their own slang, they have their own music, and people live on either side, and they know each other. They even have families back and forth, or they work back and forth, or they go back and forth shopping. So I thought, this is very interesting. When you close a border, you actually seal it off. Animals go back and forth. There are Native American tribes, the Toho Odom people in Arizona and Mexico, who actually belong. Their land is on both sides. They go back and forth, you know that. And so you put a border up, suddenly you're sealing it off, and in a way you're depriving it of oxygen and business too. So I understand there's a problem. Crime is a big problem. But there's ways of solving that without sealing it off and saying, no more people. And then, having done that, I had traveled and written books about lots of other countries crossing other borders, but I thought I'm going to write about Mexico. So I wrote that book. And that's about a physical border, and written at a time when it was in the news. And I think that border crossings, in a way, first I found out I had to learn Spanish to go across. And that was very helpful, because that opened a door. But the other thing about crossing borders is that, as Nelson suggested in his introduction, that you become the person that you're meant to be. Travel often does that. So it's a Jungian concept, that individuation, it's called in Jungian psychology. You are born, you're at home, but to find out who you are, what you want, what you're capable of, what's inside you, you need to go away. You need to find that person, usually to go away. And it's not a straight line. In Jungian philosophy, it's a circumambulation. You go here, you go there, you go there, you go there. So in life, the people who are the most together, let's say, or who find out what they want, usually are people who have traveled or have gone away from home and discovered by this random process, circumambulating, what it is they want, who they're going to be. But it's not becoming a different person. It's becoming the person inside you, the person with that dream, that imagination, that intellect, whatever it is. It's that. And most people, the people I knew who joined the Peace Corps, were transformed by it. They thought, I'd never thought of going to Turkey or Nepal or Nigeria or India or Africa. Suddenly they go and they realize, I've found something. And you discover, I'm sure, Nelson, when you went, you had thought of going to Uganda, that you were a different person. When you left Uganda, you had a direction. Am I wrong? No. So there's that. The other thing that I mentioned is that it takes, in the way that, not a lot of people read books. Do you know that? That reading has never been a very popular or immersive activity that it's very small, always in life, since the first novel was probably what, Don Quixote, 1604, but or then in Elizabethan times there's Thomas Nash, 17th century. Since then, not many people read. I can't think of anything, any experience more blissful than sitting down with a book that I love, especially lying in bed at night, going back to that book and reading the book. I love doing it. It's not everyone's thing. Why? It's a lot of work. There's a risk. There's an effort of will to just pick up a book. Here's a book. Okay, here we have 430 pages. You pick it up, you feel a little tired, you're like, am I up to this? Well, you start reading and you think, not too bad. And then you put it away and then you go back to it. And then you get to know and if it's a novel, you get to know the people in it. In David Copperfield, it's David, his mother, Murdstone, the other people. In Moby Dick, it's Captain Ahab, it's Ishmael. And you get to know them and you think, well, what's going to happen next? Is he going to die? Is he going to succeed? Is he brave? Are they going to find the white whale? Whatever it is. And you become compelled by it. You know that character from the inside out. That's one of the thrills of reading fiction. But that's an intellectual border that you're crossing too. And it's an effort of will. There's a risk involved. Am I wasting my time, you might think? Well, there are a lot of books you might be wasting your time. And you would actually put them away. When you find one that you like, I mean, it's a great pleasure. I'm sure you agree with me. I'm talking to a university audience here. I don't have to flog a dead horse in that respect. But when I was growing up, I was always, in the same way that people used to say to me, you shouldn't go there. But even when I went to Africa, I remember we were in Syracuse learning politics and learning the language. The language is called Chichewa. And so we spoke, but I remember one of the teachers there saying, no, he was a entomologist, and he was telling us about all the diseases that you could get in Africa, bilharzia, schistosomiasis, eyeworm, dengue fever, a lovely one called Putsy fly fever, which you're familiar with it? Any dogs say where you hang your laundry out on the line, and flies come and they lay eggs on your wet laundry. Then you take it off, but you don't know this, and you put the T-shirt on. You think, this is great, and you hatch the eggs. The warmth of your body hatches the eggs, and it becomes a little maggot that burrows into your skin. And then it burrows into your skin, and you think, my goodness, I've got a rash. But you haven't got a rash. You have worms in your body. Now, I've had it, actually. But I remember the guy saying, you shouldn't go there, it's dangerous. Don't worry about putsy fly fever. The cure for it is iron your shirt. When you iron it, you kill the eggs, and they won't hatch. Simple solution. But if you don't, I was wearing an unironed shirt, and I discovered, and it's quite a big process of getting these little things. I don't want to turn your stomach at dinner time, but people used to say, well, that'll happen to you, and stay home. Well, actually, you go away, you find out, okay, I'm going to overcome putsy flies. Are you familiar with it, Nate?
We call them mango flies.
What do you call them?
Mango flies.
Mango flies.
In Malawi, yeah.
Putsy was the word that they used in. It might be a Chichewa word, putsy fly. But, okay, so people said, don't do it. Don't read that book. In the 60s, it was don't read that book. And this is a whole other topic, really. Another border crossing. Lady Chatterley's Lover was banned. Naked Lunch was banned. Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller was banned. So I come from an era of banned books. Ulysses by James Joyce was banned. There was a court case over it. Imagine living in a place where books are banned. Is it a big stretch of the imagination? No, it's not. Because people are banning books now. There are a lot of books right now that no one wants you to read. Huckleberry Finn, for the language in it. There's a troublesome word in Huckleberry Finn that makes it unsuitable for high schools. It's not read anymore. Maybe in a small way, but in general, Huckleberry Finn is not a popular book for that word. Am I wrong? No, I'm not. It's kind of a banned book. Lolita had a troubled history when it first came out, people saying it's a bad book. You know the subject of Lolita, it's about a middle-aged man having an affair with a 13-year-old. It's not described in detail, but we know that they're having a relationship, and they take a trip. It's a big road trip in the book. Would that be as popular now as when it came out in 1957, I think it was? No, I can't imagine. Am I wrong about that? I can't imagine that Lolita would be. Naked Lunch. So Lady Chatterley got cleared. People might read it. But we live in an era where some books are either unpopular to the point where no one's suggesting them, right? So we've never emerged from censorship. They're still being censored. And it interests me because when I was growing up, those are the books that I wanted to read. When someone said this book is banned, Lady Chatterley, I got a copy, I read it. I had a friend in high school, his father had a copy, we read it. Lady Chatterley. It's actually a very interesting book. There's a lot of sex in it, but it's really about a man who was injured in the First World War. And it's about a woman's awakening, and it's about culture in 1918, 1919, you know, pre-Bloomsbury. It's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, have a look at it, because the sex has been somewhat exaggerated. There was another book that it wasn't banned, but it wasn't popular. It was called Miss Lonely Hearts by Nathaniel West. Is that a familiar book to you? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Nathaniel West wrote The Day of the Locust, about Hollywood. But Miss Lonely Hearts was about a book. It was a book about a man who writes advice to the lovelorn column. It's just a guy with a cigar. He's Miss Lonely Hearts, typing out, well, try going to bed early. Try cold showers, you know. But he's typing. So he's this guy, this cigar-smoking guy, is giving advice to lovelorn. It's not a long book. When it came out, it divided people. People thought this is a very strange book. But I read that and I got very fond of Nathaniel West. I was not a great reader of Ernest Hemingway. We were told Hemingway is great, but I didn't think he was that great. I thought that Hemingway was rather dull, and that he hated women, and he was hunting. Do you want to read about a guy hunting, you know, shooting elephants or shooting buffalo? No, I don't want to read that. I don't care about it. But he cared a lot about it. And so The Green Hills of Africa is not not that popular. The style of For Whom the Bell Tolls didn't grab me. But I loved Miss Lonely Hearts. I loved The Day of the Locust. And then I read Henry Miller. So there's a kind of intellectual or cultural border crossing that you make when you're going and you're choosing those books. You're going in that direction with those books. Not popular. It doesn't make you popular with the department, because the department's saying, well, you should read Hemingway, you should read William Faulkner. Well, a lot of William Faulkner is practically unreadable to me. Some of it is masterful, great. Some of it isn't. Same with Hemingway. But I thought, no, I'm going to choose my own pathway. And so that was another kind of border crossing that I made. And then I came across a book. Someone recommended it to me. It's a book by John Collier. Is anyone familiar with John Collier, who's an English, nodding head?
Famous Thayer School professor.
What is it?
Famous Thayer School professor here at John College.
Okay, that's a different John Collier. That's a different John Collier. That's John Collier, the professor. I'm thinking of John Collier, who was wrote the first script to The African Queen. Do you know The African Queen? He wrote the first script. And then James Tait, I think, wrote another script. It was about, Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. You've all seen the movie? You all love the movie? John Collier. So have you ever heard of John Collier? Yes, you have. Yes, you have. He wrote The African Queen. He also wrote a book about the future called Full Circle. He wrote a lot of short stories in The New Yorker. He wrote poems. And he wrote an amazing novel that begins in Africa where a man has a chimpanzee. Nate, this is your territory, primatology. So Alfred Fatigué has a chimpanzee, and he's in the Congo. And he decides, it's the 1920s, he decides to go back to England. The chimpanzee is called Emily, and Emily is a lovable chimpanzee who actually adores Alfred. They go to London, it's the 20s, and people are very frivolous, and the women are wearing short skirts, and they're doing dances, and they're drinking too much, and they're being foolish. And Emily, the chimpanzee, is not happy. She doesn't like what's happening to, because Alfred has a fiancée. So it would take too long to tell how this happens, but when the marriage takes place, Emily, the chimpanzee, who's dressing the fiancée, locks her in a cupboard, puts on the wedding dress, goes down to the altar, and is married to Alfred. When he lifts, you may kiss the bride. He lifts it, it's Emily. By goodness. Next chapter. Emily's banished. Alfred's bereft. He's married to the chimpanzee. He can't marry the woman anymore. It's a problem. So it goes in two directions. Alfred becomes bereft. He loses his job. One bad thing after another. And one day, he's in Piccadilly. It happens in London. He's in Piccadilly, and he's at the Ritz, and he sees someone coming out of the Ritz, handsomely dressed, in a mantilla and going out of the Ritz. It's Emily. People think she's Spanish and not a chimpanzee, and they think, and she actually is a showgirl. She's been in a number of distinguishing herself as a dancer and a performer. And she rescues her. She's Alfred. Alfred's just there, and she rescues him. And ultimately, they get together again. She says, the only place I'm ever going to be happy, the only place you belong, is in Bolobo, I think it's called. It sounds like Bonobo, but I think it's Bolobo in the lower Congo River. They go back, and they cohabit, and they're happily ever after. They live happily ever after. Alfred and his chimpanzee bride. So this is the book. It's called His Monkey Wife. Okay, you're familiar with the book? No, you're not. I wrote the introduction to this book. I did. This was in a series called 20th Century Classics. So his monkey wife. No, monkeys are not chimpanzees, right? But he didn't know that. I told his widow. His widow actually gave me some information about him. This book has never been taught in a university. This is kind of a banned book. This book is, no, we can't have that. Because in the last page, they consummate their marriage. We can't have that. It's done with exquisite taste, the consummation. exquisite taste. But these were the wayward works of fiction which constituted a border crossing for me. And when I think about it, I would take one of these to 10 Ernest Hemingways. Someone of this cast of mind, let's say, someone who has this imagination. And so I think it would be called a transgressive novel. But to read it, people say there's books, as I say, I was raised, you can't read this book. It's like they're saying about Huckleberry Finn now. You shouldn't read this book, or Lolita. You shouldn't read this book. If you tell me that, I'm going to read the book. If you tell me there's a country, people said to me, don't drive in Mexico. People in Texas, don't drive in Mexico, it's dangerous, you're going to have a problem. Well, I had a problem with the police, but not a big problem. Not a problem that a bribe wouldn't, they're looking for a bribe, mordida. Okay, fine, how much do you want? Thank you, can I go on my way? Can I have a receipt? Bye, go. I had problems with police, I suppose we all have, speeding, rudeness, whatever it is. If you raise your voice with a policeman, that's an offense. You can't raise it above a certain register. That's called, there's a name for it.
Disorderly?
What is it?
Disorderly?
Disorderly conduct, maybe, yeah, disorderly. You can't do... Shut up. Disorderly conduct, yeah, okay. So, we love the police, and they help us out. But I've had that problem in Mexico. But people saying, don't go. Well, when people say don't go, why are you saying it? My first question is, have you been there? Don't go to Africa. Have you been there? No, but I've heard, well, I don't want to hear that. In Mexico, they were saying, in Texas, the border is there, and although they use immigrant labor all the time, they don't go across. So my question was, well, have you been there? No. But then you go there and you find amazing things. Just across Chihuahua is full of Mennonites. Mennonites making cheese, and Mormons in Mexico. That was Romney. Mitt Romney's father was born in Mexico. Am I wrong? So big Mormon cult. Why are they there? So they can be polygamists. You go to Mexico, you can do. Yeah, we can have polygamy here. We can't have it in Utah. So you find it's not just cartels and gangsters and drug runners. It's Mennonites, Hutterites, Mormons, painters, Orozco, who did your fabulous mural. Nice people, creative people, composers, writers, thinkers. So I went there. That's what this book is about. I've written other books, but I'm saying it kind of opened my eyes, and we're right there. Another, Canada. What do we know about Canada? Not very much. What do Canadians know about us? A lot, actually. Canadians are like a farm team for American culture. Writers, comedians, actors, singers, they come down and they make life, enrich our lives. Any Canadians here? There you go. I know, I should have gone because you were smiling. So but it's true, isn't it? And so they've helped us a lot. Do we want them to become the 51st state? Well, no, of course not. It's not the first time, over the years, there have been lots of attempts to annex Canada. George Washington wanted to annex Canada. James Madison, it was put to him. It's often been mooted, but it's a different country. It's a different country. It's a different culture. Women's rights are respected in Canada, all over Canada. Canada has healthcare for everyone, for everyone. They have the CBC. They don't look for money from, can you give us some money? We're taking the week, we're going to give you a tote bag. The CBC doesn't do that. They're there in French and English, all of many admirable things that we could learn from, actually. And my ancestors went to Canada in 1693 from France. So I have deep roots and relatives still in Canada, in Yamaska, southeast of Montreal. So I thought, when I've been going there for a number of years, that was another big border crossing. It's right near here. I'll bet there are a lot of people in New Hampshire who've never been there, or people who maybe just hop across the border, but it's an amazing place. Rich, huge, and with a very small population. There are only 40 million people in Canada. That's the same as the population of California. As a border crossing, you will have nothing but wonderful experiences going there. Great food, wonderful people, the literature is wonderful, and and you can make friends there too. So I decided to do that, to make another border crossing and write about that, mainly because Trump was saying, we're going to make you the 51st state. So I thought, well, what do they think about it? And I had been traveling there before he said that, which is kind of a weird thing. We're going to make you a state. We're going to take over. And then he was abusing them and so forth. But I thought, well, what do we know about it? Not a lot. Even my relatives went there. I didn't know a lot. So I thought, another road trip. So I went there. And I'm working on the book, and I hope it comes out next year. Going to a little-known or unknown place is always a border crossing. It can be in your own country. I was in Angola, and I wrote a book about Angola called The Last Train to Zona Verde. I went to Southern Africa and then went up to Angola. And I thought that I'm not having a great time here. I'm not finding out anything new. I've never been to Mississippi. I've never been to Alabama. I've never been to Arkansas. I don't know much about South Carolina. And I decided after I wrote that book, I'm going to get my car and I'm going to drive around the South. And it was a formative experience, transformative, I would say. I suddenly discovered things about America that I never knew, just by taking the ride. So I did. That book is called Deep South, and it's about the back roads of the South. And you discover amazing things. I mean, I did anyway. I mean, for example, gun show. You could go to a gun show in the South, walk in, and say, "That's a Luger. That's a German 9mm Luger. Yeah, look at it. How much? $300. Okay. You give them the money, put it in your pocket, and walk away. That doesn't happen in New Hampshire. It doesn't happen in many other places. But so the gun culture, very big. The history of the Civil War, the history of segregation, the persistence of poverty in places. Clinton, our president, formed the Clinton Global Initiative to help people in India. There was AIDS in Africa. Do you know what the illiteracy rate and the infant mortality rate in Arkansas is? Very high. The Clinton Global Initiative doesn't operate, as far as I know. The farmers told me, there were black farmers in the Delta, said, we never see him. Where is he? He's somewhere else. So that was kind of interesting. I didn't know that. I thought he was governor for almost 12 years. But the Clinton Global Initiative is, he's in Gujarat. Mr. Patel, do you need more money? Yes, sir. Here, build yourself another motel. Help yourself. Do something. And so you go to rural Arkansas, the Ozarks, and I thought, I'm in another place. I'm in another country. This is another border crossing. So I wrote the book, Deep South. You also find out, you begin to understand William Faulkner and, the writers of the South, too. So that was a revelation. A lot of trouble? No. I leave Cape Cod, you drive 500 miles and you get to Fredericksburg, Virginia, stay there in a motel. Then next day you go another 500 miles and you're in Alabama or South Carolina. A couple of days, you're there. You don't have to get in a plane, you drive, you get your car, you get some beer, you get some food, you stay in a motel, walk around, talk to people. And I made a point of meeting people who were having a tough time. So I got hooked up with the welfare agencies and people helping them build houses and so forth. What Clinton was claiming to do, actually. So that was another physical border. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are physical borders, psychological borders, cultural borders. At their best, they involve risk or the unknown. You're going into the unknown. No one really wants to go into the unknown, but when you go into the unknown, then you've achieved something. So I think the ignorant questions of fearful people are, what will you do there? How will you survive? It's dangerous. I would say do it. My advice is don't go as a tourist, don't go as a part-timer. Go wholeheartedly. Most of you, I can tell that you have traveled. You may not have been to Angola or, I don't know, other places, but you've traveled. Is there anyone here who doesn't own a passport? Okay. Is there anyone here who has not left the United States? Okay. I rest my case. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll answer them, but yeah, any question? Yeah.
You mentioned learning languages when you go to places where the languages aren't commonly spoken by us. How difficult how do you go about learning? I don't know if you speak Swahili or what African language.
Okay, you hear the question, it's about language learning. Language learning is not an intellectual activity. It doesn't, an 8-year-old in Afghanistan associating with American soldiers can pick up English. Has he been to school? No. Is he a brain? No, he's probably just of average intelligence. But an Afghan or in Africa or whatever it is in India, it will happen. It's not about your brain. Language learning is an activity. It's an activity. It's something, it's very bad these days to do accents, an Indian accent or a Spanish accent. But one way to learn a language is to imitate accents. That's a good beginning. But the other is, it's an activity. It's an activity. So you look at verb forms or vocabulary or sentences and you repeat them, usually with headphones. And so you do it, the repetition of it, and then you practice it. You practice it with somebody who knows, and you pick it up. So it's something you need to throw yourself into. You need to be uninhibited. You need to connect with people and practice. It's just that. It's just like learning to bounce a ball. It's learning to ride a bike. It's not an intellectual activity. It's about repetition, memory.
Do you find it harder as you grow more experienced?
Here's the hard part, because you might be suggesting that there's an age factor, but there's no age factor. You can learn a language at any age. The problem is when you've learned 2 or 3 languages, it's hard to learn a new one because you're relating it to a previous one. So it's hard to hold a lot of different languages in your head. But if you've never learned a language and you're 80 years old, you could easily learn a new language. If you've learned another language and you're 80, it might be more difficult. But it's to do with, it's just, as I say, it's an activity. It's not an intellectual activity. It's an activity of performance and repetition. And there are good ways to do it. The ideal way is, the first was just with headphones. The first language I learned was Italian. I went to Medford High School in Medford, Massachusetts. I studied Italian, and then I went to Italy. After college, I went to Italy, and I could speak it. So high school Italian. My oldest son, studied Russian in high school, and he's in his 50s now. He speaks Russian. He still speaks Russian. He learned it, and he keeps practicing it. So practice is a very important thing. It shouldn't be done. People say, "Oh, I can't learn a language." You haven't tried. If you're motivated to do it, you can do it. But you need a little help. You need some help. You need a method to do it. Maybe one more question if there is. Yeah.
I'd be interested if you ever experienced any regret not going into medicine.
Yes, I did.
Would you share a little bit?
Yes, I always felt, it's a very interesting question that you've asked, is that even when I was in Africa, when I had time off, I used to work in hospitals and just help. They were always in need of someone who could do simple stuff in a hospital. And so it was always in my mind that I would do it. And then at that time, there was a leprosarium. It's called Hansen's disease now. And I went, and it was run by priests from Holland, Dutch priests. The leprosarium had it may have had 800 people in it. It was a lot because it was families, and they all had leprosy. So I went, and I worked there, and it was in a very remote place. I could practice the language there. I got friendly with the priests who were very nice. I mean, I used to say, "How long are you going to be here?" They said, "Well, till we die. We're going to be buried here." Imagine that. Imagine the commitment. We're just here. We're here for, like Cortez burning his boats. We burned our boat. We're here. So I thought that was very interesting, and culturally it was interesting too because there were families and they were very traditional families. I then maintained the idea that I might go to medical school into my late 20s, early 30s. But I think the comparison might be with a woman who thinks, I'm going to have a baby, I'm just busy at the moment, but I really would like to have a child. And then you get to a point, I'm not presuming, I guess I'm presuming, where a woman thinks, I guess I'm never going to have a child. And I got to the point where I thought, I'm too old, I'm too fixed, I've got too many responsibilities. And there was a certain point, early 30s, when I thought, I guess I'm never going to go to medical school. And I was very sorry about it. You asked about regrets. I really did have regrets because I admire the medical profession. And I always thought I could do something with it. I thought I could do it. It's like, that's not intellectual either, that I was a science student. That you don't need a big brain to study biology. You only have to love it and remember it. And so memory is a very big factor in it. And I thought I could do that. But anyway, it didn't happen. So, but I got to a point. I maintained that. I don't talk about this much, but I thought, and I used to talk to doctors. I said, "How old were you when you went to medical school? When did you do it?" And I lived in England for a while, and I remember someone saying, "Yeah, you could do it. I did it. I was older, and I did it, and I think you could." I was having a conversation, but at the same time. I'm writing, but writing is a very, it's not difficult, but it takes a lot of time. And if you love to do it, you can do it, but you can't rush it. And you can't, I've often thought with writing, what is writing compatible with? Nothing. It's not compatible with going to parties, it's not compatible with drinking, with socializing, with having another job. It's just not compatible with anything. It's just, if you're a writer, you do that, and you kind of remove yourself from society if you're really serious, if you want to be prolific and keep writing. Well, I have been, but I'm not a social animal, and so I wasn't able to do both. Who's done it both? Chekhov was a doctor, and he was a good doctor too. Somerset Maugham was a doctor. William Carlos Williams, the poet from New Jersey, was a medical doctor. He delivered a lot of babies. Voltaire was a doctor. And those were my heroes. I thought, well, they did it. Chekhov did it. Why can't I? Anyway, thanks very much.